Ms. Alison Drayton, Director, United Nations Population Fund, UNFPA, Caribbean Subregional Office. Mr. Lars Johansen, Deputy Director, ILO Decent Work Team and Office for the Caribbean. Mr. Chen, President, Caribbean Employers Confederation. Mr. Andre Lewis, President, Caribbean Congress of Labour. Ms. Susan Hodge, Assistant General Secretary and Treasurer, Caribbean Congress of Labour. Representatives of UNFPA, representatives of regional universities, representatives of both employer and labour unions, members of the press, good morning. My name is Brittany Brathwaite, and I'm Regional Labour Policy Lead with the Caribbean Employers Confederation on the Spotlight Initiative, and I'll be your moderator during this panel discussion. A brief overview of the Spotlight Initiative was included in your media kit, but it's important to note that this initiative is multi-sectoral, and the approach is to engage civil society, government, state institutions, and communities to eradicate all forms of family violence. The launch of this program and this initiative in such a tripartite manner speaks to the way in which the initiative will be executed, and we look forward to the advantages that the region by extension will have. Our first speaker this morning will be Mr. Andre Lewis, President, Caribbean Congress of Labour. Over to you, Mr. Lewis, to provide your remarks.
Good morning, and thank you very much, Madam Chair. I would like to acknowledge Ms. Alison Drayton, Director, UNFPA, Caribbean Subregional Office, Mr. Chen, President, Caribbean Employers Confederation, Mr. Lars Johansen, Deputy Director, ILO Decent Work Team and Office for the Caribbean, and Ms. Susan Hodge, Assistant General Secretary and Treasurer of the Caribbean Congress of Labour. Good morning to members of the Caribbean Employers Confederation and members of the Caribbean Congress of Labour who have joined and are joining us live via the various streams. And good morning as well to the members of the media who have joined us for this media conference. Let me start by saying that both the CCL and CEC have a long history of productive collaboration. So the decision to work and collaborate on an issue as important as this was an easy one to make. This partnership under the Regional Spotlight Initiative will develop joint regional policies and advocacies, strategies for the eradication of gender-based violence, or GBV, in the workplace. When we speak of gender-based violence in the world of work, we are referring to a range of unacceptable behaviors and practices or threats thereof, whether a single or repeated occurrence that aimed at, result in, or are likely to result in physical, psychological, sexual, or economic harm, and includes gender-based violence and harassment. If the trade union movement is to improve operations in the interest of its members, then its representation must extend beyond securing decent wages and other traditional benefits. The leadership of the movement must demonstrate, by example, its commitment to eradicating all forms of violence against women and girls. It is no secret that the leadership of the movement at this time is predominantly male, and that is why it is even more important for us as men in leadership to make our position clear as allies of the women at our workplaces and by extension the wider society. We as a movement must concern ourselves with the well-being of all workers, both unionized and non-unionized. With a membership density of only about 20% on average, we must have the full support of employers if we are to create the safe working environments that are necessary for women. This should not be a contentious issue between employers and unions. The task ahead is not an easy one, as the line between family life and the workplace is often blurred, and this has become even more of an issue because of COVID-19. We are convinced that this Spotlight initiative, focusing on the workplace, will also contribute to the fight against gender-based violence in the wider community. And we are all aware, colleagues, that there is an apparent increase or publicity of violence throughout our society. According to Cruz and Klinger, 2011, from a business case perspective, gender-based violence in the workplace causes pain and suffering, which can result in victims' absence from work or leaving their jobs, ill health, disability, or even death. It can impact on work performance, motivation, staff loyalty, the quality of work, and timely production, as well as on the working environment. That is according to Cruz and Klinger. Further, research from the Better Works Impact Assessment in Vietnam demonstrated that profitability of garment factories increases as working conditions improved. Better Work found that in factories which were more compliant with labor standards and had better working conditions, workers were more productive than the counterparts in otherwise similar factories. And this is important to bear in mind. Additionally, we must recognize a woman's right to a safe working environment as a fundamental human right. I want to repeat this. Additionally, we must recognize a woman's right to a safe working environment as a fundamental human right. There can be no compromise on this position. Whatever policy we develop must embody this principle, and it must be clear and evident to anyone who reads the document. There is a glaring inconsistency between legislative commitments, policies, and actions. As the most recent National Women's Health Survey for Trinidad and Tobago reported, and I quote, the inefficacy of law enforcement and lack of appropriate trained police officers continue to be major stumbling blocks for survivors of gender-based violence. Furthermore, the judicial system is plagued with inordinate delays, high costs associated with attorneys and legal fees, inconsistent bail matters, and witness reliability. End of quote. Notwithstanding what is a daunting reality, the commitment we make here today signals an opportunity for our places of work to take the lead in this important struggle. We are in full control to ensure that our efforts are not in vain. In the months ahead, we must put our shoulders to the wheel and do the hard work to create the necessary framework to safeguard our places of work against all forms of gender-based violence. We in the CCL, Caribbean Congress of Labor, are fully committed to this effort, and we are here to be counted as an ally to this cause. Finally, we take this opportunity to publicly thank Dr. Andre Henry Vincent Henry and his dedicated team at the Cipriani College of Labor and Cooperative Studies for the efforts which they have put in so far and which I have no doubt will continue and be sustained throughout the life of this project. I thank you, and I look forward to any questions at the appropriate time. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lewis. I will now hand over to Mr. Wayne Chen, President of the Caribbean Employers Confederation, to facilitate his remarks.
Thank you. Ms. Alison Drayton, Director of UNFPA Caribbean Sub-Regional Office. Mr. Lars Johansen, Deputy Director, ILO Decent Work Team and Office for the Caribbean. My colleague and friend, Mr. Andre Lewis, President of the Caribbean Congress of Labor. Representatives of partnering bodies, members of the media, specially invited guests, ladies and gentlemen. And I'd like to start off by endorsing what my colleague, Andre Lewis, President of the Caribbean, the CCL, has just said, that a safe workplace is a human right. And today, as we launch this joint initiative against gender-based violence, I believe we can easily agree that making workplaces throughout the Caribbean comfortable for our women and girls has to be a high priority. We have a long and sordid history in this area, and it's a timely initiative, and it's something that we will be working together strenuously and earnestly to fix. So I heartily endorse Andre's comments. The Caribbean Employers Confederation is genuinely pleased to have this opportunity to be one of the regional organizations selected to implement the Spotlight Initiative. I take this opportunity to thank the United Nations Population Fund. The Confederation is equally enthused to have the opportunity to jointly deliver this initiative with the Caribbean Congress of Labor. And Andre will know that we have worked together very closely in the past. I think by now, Andre, the public understands that labor and capital can work together, because as nationalists and regionalists, we have the same goal: prosperous societies, prosperous workers, prosperous businesses, peaceful societies, societies where our daughters and sons can grow up and look forward to their own futures in these societies. So we have come together many times in the past on big initiatives because we see the common good and we share the common dream. So we are enthused for this opportunity again to work together with the support of the ILO Decent Work Team and the Caribbean office we are very familiar with. We are acutely aware that this initiative provides an opportunity for employers and labor to play an important role in eradicating violence against women and girls. And we are committed to being leaders and active campaigners for this cause. You see, the vision of the Caribbean Employers Confederation is to be the main advocate for the resolution of labor market issues for Caribbean employers, and to be the coordinating body for the development of the social responsibility of enterprises in the Caribbean territories. Advocacy and activism aren't new to us. We have upheld this vision for the past 60 years and continue to respond to the evolving needs. This is why the development of a joint regional policies and advocacy strategies to eradicate gender-based violence at the workplace is a matter that we fully endorse. Gender-based violence affects employers, because we have seen it impact negatively morale, reduce productivity. It's at the base of poor performance in many areas. And greater than that, gender-based violence is quite simply an infringement on individuals' human rights, as my colleague Andre has so articulately and strenuously emphasized. I will acknowledge that all of us here today do not have all the answers, but a collaborative approach like this can certainly make for real and tangible improvements in the lives of women and girls. And I don't want to just say women and girls, by extension, men and boys also, because it's not just women and girls that will be liberated from the stain of violence. It liberates the men also, because we are all fathers, brothers, sons, and we've been liberating some, we are liberating all. I just want to emphasize that point. Ladies and gentlemen, the drivers of the Spotlight Initiative have directed their focus towards the workplace. There isn't a better time for us to bring that issue to the forefront. The project is being launched in a period where the lockdown measures of COVID-19 have painfully revealed the violence and vulnerability that many of our women and girls experience. The circumstances of having to work from home or not having a job to go over the over the past 2 years have left many women and girls exposed to violent partners or relatives. The violence that they have experienced has been physical, sexual, emotional, economic, and psychological. In many cases, they have experienced a combination of some or all of the above. For months, these survivors would have been on the receiving end of these abhorrent acts without the reprieve of being able to go to school or to work. We cannot allow this to continue. But ladies and gentlemen, the pendulum swings in both directions. Or as Martin Luther King, whose passing we celebrated just a couple of days ago, that I want to just paraphrase one of his famous sayings: the arc of the universe tends towards justice. And in this instance, progress might be slow, but it will have to be steady with our guidance and leadership. These same remote working options also mean that organizations like the CEC can engage its membership, CCL too. We have 14 active member states in the Caribbean, representing thousands of employers. We can work with them to create sound policies nationally. We can lobby nationally for more sensitization, and we can lobby in our own workplaces through our members to be sensitive to this issue and to support the goals of the initiative. The option to work from anywhere means that we can collaborate virtually. I've always said that a crisis is too good an opportunity to waste, and one of the things that we have learned in the last 2 years is how to use platforms like Zoom, even though we had a few technical issues this morning. Once we all get our updates up on our backgrounds and our lighting right, we can still collaborate without me having to fly down to Grenada to share a drink, but not that we don't want to meet again in the future face-to-face, but in the interim, we can do a lot of work virtually. So we will continue to maintain positive relations with the labor movement, collaborative relations with our social partners, working for the sustained growth and development of our islands and by extension, the region. At this point, I must commend and thank the UNFPA for the work that they have done through this initiative. And I want to add the historical work they have done on this issue. We are new partners to them, but we are fully conscious of their long history of work in the region on the matter of gender-based violence. Since the commencement of the regional program, you have made the Spotlight Initiative a household name. I'm genuinely pleased that you have seen the value of employing a workplace approach as an added dimension to achieving your goal of eliminating gender-based violence. As we move forward for this project, I'd like to underscore the CEC's endorsement and willing to work with the CCL. I've said that several times and I'll continue to say it, to cooperate across the region for the implementation of policies supported by action. Talk is cheap, implementation is difficult. Beyond that, I pledge my support ensuring that the policy is operation across all the national employers organizations and by extension, all employers across the region. My final point, we are here preaching to the choir by and large today. The underlying base of gender-based violence is rooted in long-standing historical cultural practices. The hardest change is a change of mindsets in a society that has been male-dominated for centuries. We as men, and Andre, I'm being presumptuous to say we as old men, have a lot of the responsibility to bear to change the minds of our colleagues and the younger men to move away from a lot of historical issues, a lot of cultural issues, but it's necessary work. We lead by example, we lead by as mentors, we lead as leaders. And here this morning, and I hear it in the room, we have a commitment to making this happen. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chen, President of the Caribbean Employers Confederation, for those remarks. I'll now hand over to Mr. Lars Johansen, Deputy Director, ILO in the Caribbean. Over to you.
Thank you very much. I am unmuted, I hope. I will stand on in interest of time, on the protocol that's been established, thank you all for the invitation to be here and be part of this launch. The Caribbean part of the Spotlight Initiative, which is a global program or initiative, focuses on gender-based violence and harassment in the family setting. So one might ask oneself what role an organization like the ILO and especially workers and employers organizations have in this work, given its area of focus. The reason why it is important, and of course my colleagues, Mr. Lewis and Mr. Chen, have already pointed to it, why it's important that organizations such as the CEC and the CCL are involved, is that there is a clear link between home and workplace, which cannot be ignored. Whether it is about the workplace as an arena where attitudes and opinions are formed and acted on, or the workplace as a possible haven from abuses happening at home. So just a few points from my side on the linkage between the home or the family context and the workplace. For many, the workplace is where we spend at least half of our waking hours during the week. And therefore it is, however much we talk about separating and work-life balance, the workplace is a fundamental part of our lives. In our interactions with co-workers, colleagues, and in the signals that are delivered from management, attitudes and opinions can be shaped and acted upon. The workplace is therefore an important venue to raise awareness and contribute to changing attitudes on issues such as gender-based harassment and violence. Domestic or family violence comes also with a cost. First and foremost to the victims of it, but also to their workplaces and by extension to society, among others due to work days that are lost and also productivity losses as examples. The workplace can contribute to be a support structure for survivors of gender-based violence, or it can contribute to further victimize. The latter, for instance, if the person ends up dismissed due to missing work days caused by injuries from harassment and violence at home, or the former, if it provides a safe space and even advice, legal support, and other areas of support to the victims. Last point in this session on the linkage is, of course, the importance that work and income has to provide an opportunity to survivors of domestic or family setting violence to leave the situation they're in. Economic dependence often keeps women in situations and relationships which are damaging and in some cases even dangerous. So work and income is and can be an escape route from these situations. While my colleagues from the CCA and CCL have given you a bit of an overview of the work that will be carried out jointly in the context of this component, I will take just a few minutes to say some words about the first international treaty aimed at addressing and eliminating violence and harassment in the world of work, the ILO's Convention number 190, which is aptly named the Violence and Harassment Convention, and its accompanying recommendation number 206. They were both adopted in 2019 and entered into force in June last year. Just for information, an ILO convention enters into force 1 year after 2 countries have ratified it. So that's why it takes a bit from adoption to entry into force. So why was it deemed necessary to develop an instrument of this type? It is based on the recognition that violence and harassment, sadly, including gender-based violence, is present in all sectors, in all countries, and it is fundamentally incompatible with decent work. It is a threat to equal opportunities, and it's completely irreconcilable with safe and healthy and productive working environments. The COVID-19 pandemic, as we all know, has been a somber reminder that in times of crisis, the risk of violence escalates. There have been many reports of work-related violence and harassment, and a dramatic increase in occurrences of domestic violence. And importantly, the COVID-19 pandemic has also, since so many people had their home become their workplace, myself included, during the last 2 years, this further blurred the lines between work at home and made, in a sense, domestic violence and harassment also workplace violence and harassment. Convention 190 establishes then a common framework for preventing and addressing and eliminating this devastating phenomenon. It constitutes a formal commitment from the international community towards achieving a right of everyone to a world of work free from violence and harassment, including gender-based violence and harassment. I once again want to refer to that linkage between the home and the workplace, which also the convention and the recommendation points to. For instance, recommendation 206, which is the accompanying guidance document, if you may, to the convention, points to measures that can be taken to support victims of domestic or violence in the family setting in the world of work. For instance, providing leave for victims of domestic violence, providing flexible work arrangement and protection for the victims, protection against dismissal for victims when that is appropriate, to include domestic violence as an element of workplace risk assessments, particularly relevant now that the workplace for many have also at least partially become their home. Establishment of a referral system to public mitigation measures for domestic violence where they exist, and also, of course, as mentioned, the shaping of attitudes and opinions and so on, the awareness raising about the effects of domestic violence. So far, only 11 countries in the world have ratified this convention. It is still very new, and none of them are from the Caribbean. There was a lot of interest, I think there still is a lot of interest from several of our countries, but then, as we all know, the pandemic came and shifted the priorities of the governments and also workers and employers organizations in the region to other more acute issues. But in our campaigning for the ratification of Convention 190, there is now clearly renewed interest and engagement, and we hope to soon have the first Caribbean ratification of this important convention. I will stop there and once again congratulate CEC and CCL on this joint work that they're embarking on, and wish us the best of success in going forward in helping preventing gender-based violence in the Caribbean. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Johansen. Thank you to our colleagues for the remarks as we launch this morning. I will now hand over to Ms. Alison Drayton, Director of UNFPA Caribbean Sub-Regional Office, to facilitate our keynote address. Over to you, Ms. Drayton.
Thank you very much, Ms. Brathwaite, and good morning to all colleagues. Mr. Andre Lewis, President, Caribbean Congress of Labor, Mr. Wayne Chen, President, Caribbean Employers Confederation, and my colleague, Mr. Lars Johansen, Deputy Director, ILO Decent Work Team, Office for the Caribbean. Members of the CCL and CEC, media houses, colleagues and guests, good morning again. It is indeed my distinct pleasure to be here at the launch of the joint regional project being implemented by the Caribbean Employers Confederation and the Caribbean Congress of Labor, with support from the ILO and UNFPA under the European Union funded Spotlight Initiative. I am happy that UNFPA is a part of this collaboration. This initiative demonstrates a tangible commitment to addressing gender-based violence in the workplace in a meaningful way. It is also an acknowledgement that there is a problem that needs to be fixed and an indication of taking steps in the right direction to address it. GBV is, as all previous speakers have pointed out, an enormous impediment, including to sexual and reproductive health, which is an area of focus of my organization, and as pointed out in particular by Mr. Lewis, a major human rights issue, both globally and here in the Caribbean. In fact, violence against women and girls is one of the most prevalent human rights violations in the world, and it knows no social, economic, or national boundaries. Survivors of violence can suffer sexual and reproductive health consequences, including forced or unintended pregnancies, unsafe abortions, traumatic fistula, sexually transmitted infections, including HIV and even death, all of which is detrimental to productivity in the workplace. According to global statistics, 1 in 3 women will experience some form of physical or sexual violence in her lifetime. Let us put this into perspective. If you look around this virtual space, it means that 1 of every 3 women here will have or experience some form of physical or sexual violence in her lifetime. This is a very sobering situation. Ladies and gentlemen, the data, numbers, and figures may allow this issue to seem like an impersonal one. However, violence against women and girls is not just a statistic to be quoted. It is an issue that has a very real impact on many women and girls that we know. The onus is on us to take action to end this scourge in our society, and UNFPA is happy to be collaborating with the CEC, the CCL, and ILO in this joint initiative that extends to areas in our lives that we sometimes do not even recognize. As previously mentioned, this joint program is being facilitated under the Spotlight Initiative. To give a little background, Spotlight is a global initiative that seeks to eliminate all forms of violence against women and girls. It pays particular attention to domestic and family violence, sexual and gender-based violence, and harmful practices. Feminicide, trafficking in human beings, and sexual and economic, namely labor exploitation. As a demonstration of action on the Sustainable Development Goals, the Spotlight Initiative is a significant, concerted, and comprehensive investment in gender equality and ending violence to make a transformative difference in the lives of women and girls. Women worldwide and in the Caribbean are disproportionately affected by GBV, including sexual harassment and assault in the workplace. Millions of female employees are forced to work in an intimidating, hostile, or humiliating environment and experience various unwelcome forms of sexual conduct. Women are asked for sexual favors, exposed to inappropriate jokes, innuendos, and comments, and often unwanted physical contact. In the Caribbean, the focus of the Spotlight Initiative is on family violence, given its prevalence in the region. In fact, only last Saturday, there was a report in the Trinidad and Tobago media in which a teacher killed his wife in a murder-suicide. And this is one of many similar cases across the Caribbean. This type of family violence is indeed very tragic. And it also has an impact on productivity in the workplace, and by extension, negatively affects regional economies. The economic consequences of violence are felt by the survivors and also by the state. The individual experiencing violence has to consider the costs of medical treatment and legal services. She may have had to take time off from work and have lost earnings. The state has to consider the costs of healthcare for survivors of violence, costs associated with legal services, policing, caring for displaced children, and even the cost of incarceration, all of which are substantial, especially for small island developing states. This joint project is expected to serve as a key avenue to deliver prevention and response support, while also addressing issues of sexual harassment and abuse in the workplace. The project will support the provision of and access to information on sexual and reproductive health in the workplace. We expect to see an increase in the number of NEOs that promote access to and information on sexual and reproductive health. The baseline will be established from data collected during the first activity of the project. The project will also support existing efforts in the prevention of gender-based violence and the promotion of gender equality and women's empowerment in the workplace. Participants will be exposed to concepts, policies, and practices for addressing GBV in the workplace, as well as in private settings, through easy to understand and relatable text and video. We expect this to lead to an increase in the knowledge of young, vulnerable, and marginalized women and male allies about national policies on sexual and reproductive health and rights, as well as broaden their understanding of gender equality. This joint initiative will also provide the knowledge foundation for NEOs and employers to actively seek information and opportunities to address population dynamics. This refers to how populations change in size and structure over time. Important factors in population dynamics includes rates of reproduction, deaths, and migration. From this, it is expected that more NEOs will promote national policies and international development agendas on sexual and reproductive rights, HIV, and gender equality. To achieve these results, the initiative will seek to educate both national employers and national labor representative organizations on the link between violence against women and girls, including family violence, and the world of work during a joint regional virtual conference. This conference will also serve as a means of gathering baseline data that will support the development of joint policy positions that will act as a foundation for the development of a communication campaign and will also influence subsequent actions. Activities from this joint initiative will also help to raise awareness and promote positive behavior modification among the key target audiences through a communication campaign that will be executed across the 15 participating member states over a 2-month period. The campaign will be designed to reach audiences via both traditional and social media. The joint policy on gender-based violence that we hope will become a standard for behavior in the regional workplace will also be produced. One of the aims of that policy will be to raise the awareness of employer and labor representative organizations and highlight the link between violence against women and girls and the world of work. This heightened awareness is expected to inform a joint regional workplace policy on gender-based violence and protection from sexual exploitation and abuse. Another similar project was recently implemented in Trinidad and Tobago by our implementing partners, the National Trade Union Center and the Employers Consultative Association, which resulted in a joint GBV workplace policy, which we intend to launch later this year. Encouraged by the success of that national project, we have embarked on this regional effort with the knowledge that it is possible for labor and management to not only come together for a common good, but also to do so in an open and transparent manner and lead the charge in addressing gender-based violence in a decisive manner. The United Nations Population Fund is committed to supporting efforts of this nature to gain commitments for corporate action against all forms of gender-based violence. And we are grateful for all our donors, stakeholders, and partners who continue to give us their unwavering support. UNFPA remains committed to continuing to collaborate with you in order to execute our mandate of delivering a world where every pregnancy is wanted, every childbirth is safe, and every young person's potential is fulfilled. I thank the leadership of the Caribbean Employers Confederation and the Caribbean Congress of Labor, and of course, our supporting UN agency, the International Labour Organization, for accepting the challenge to join us as we pursue this key transformative result of zero gender-based violence and harmful practices, particularly in the workplace. The impact on our productivity and economies is undeniable, and we must continue to work together and support each other in this cause. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Ms. Drayton, for that feature address, and I'm sure the details offered, along with all the other remarks, provide a full scope of what we hope to achieve during this initiative at the regional level. We will now open the floor to questions from members of the media or the public alike. A kind reminder to those who may be posing questions, please list your name as well as the name of your media house when you submit your question to the Q&A box. The Q&A session is now open, and feel free to submit questions to any of our panelists or to me as host, and we'll be sure to answer. While there are no questions posted immediately, I do have a few preemptive questions, and I'll pose this directly to Mr. Lewis or Mr. Chen. We did have media asking in the lead up to this launch about the existing gaps that you hope to close as employer and employee representatives across the region in relation to gender violence. Now, we do know that there was a preliminary survey circulated, but from your perspectives as presidents of the respective organizations, what do you hope specifically that you can achieve through this tripartite effort via the workplace? And not just from a policy perspective, but what do you hope to achieve on the domestic level in your various territories?
If my colleague would allow me to take a
Of
stab
course,
at it first.
Age
Yes,
before
yes.
beauty, of course.
Well, I am always guided by you on matters such like this. Yes. Thank you very much. It is an important question, and one of the major outcomes of this initiative and what can be judged in a concrete way is to be able to get at the different national levels legislations that can help address some of those issues. There's absolutely no doubt that in a number of our territories, we do not have sexual harassment and those sort of legislation. What this will do, it is our intention through this program to lessen on the need to having to use those legislations when they come into force. But with these legislations in place, if we're able to get them in place, it will give a further confidence to our women and girls and other victims of violence, that knowledge that there is redress, that at least there is an avenue for redress. But also importantly and key is at the level of the workplace, certainly from the labor union perspective, will be the educating of our shop stewards, the educating of our key contacts at the workplaces, so that they will become champions in being able to help address some of those issues. Also at the level of the workplace and what we call our collective bargaining agreements, we will be able to go beyond just the aspect of traditional benefits to have some of these articles included. The fact that both the Employers Confederation and the Caribbean Congress of Labor has officially and openly endorsed this arrangement, it ought to lend the support and encouragement to all of our stakeholders throughout the region to cooperate and coordinate in an open and genuine way. And that would be extremely significant for us.
Thank you, Mr. Lewis. Mr. Chen, would you want to add something from the Caribbean Employers Confederation?
I think it was Confucius who said that the journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. I believe that attacking the issue of gender-based violence benefits from many touch points, if you understand what I'm saying. Bringing this discussion into the workplace, which we can through our national organizations and at the granular level, at the discussions that you actually have through the employers, talking, of course, in collaboration with the labor leaders, making, I adverted to it earlier when I said what we need is a mindset change, which is slow, but the more we get at it and keep it in the conversation, the more we lobby at the one level as Andre touched, to make sure that all the discussion around sexual harassment, bills and legislation, that they come out of the pipeline, because we do need the legislative backing in the long term. But even as we work for the rules to be formalized, we have work to do to change the mindsets. And that takes place, I like to use the analogy, hand-to-hand combat. Us talking at different levels, us as CEOs talking, but also middle management talking, also the shop floor talking at work, so that when the worker goes home and he's feeling frustrated, angry, underpaid, disrespected, that he counts to 10 before he takes it out on his family. So there are many conversations that have to take place, and we believe that given our unique position, we can contribute significantly to that conversation.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chen. We do have Hippolito Novello from Love News in Belize, and her question, or his question, my apologies if I'm not getting your gender correct. Discussions of this nature are important to be had. We always talk about policies, legislation, and prevention on paper, but how realistic are these goals under this initiative? I'm asking how effective would laws on paper translate to be on the ground situations. I do know that Ms. Drayton made mention, and she alluded to the national project that was facilitated. I am going to ask Ms. Drayton to add some detail there, and I'll also probably ask Mr. Johansen to lend some insight from a regional perspective as to how they have seen legislative frameworks make a change in countries where they probably did not have legislative frameworks before. And I will also add some details from a labor policy perspective if it doesn't fully cover. So over to you, Ms. Drayton.
Thank you, Ms. Brackett. And as Mr. Chen has already said, this is not an either or. It's very complementary. I could not agree more that, for long-term change, what we need is a mindset change, a cultural change. And we are working, UNFPA is working with partners on that. In particular, we are working with faith-based organizations, the leaders, to address issues of gender equality and GBV. And we are working in partnership with UE on developing a model for behavior change, recognizing that, and I am no way calling out men, but that many of the issues sit with how we raise our boys and young men, and how that translates into long-term impacts in how they deal with frustration and their partners. So there is that piece of it which speaks to long behavioral change, and that, as Mr. Chen has pointed out, is a significant project. One does not accomplish this in a short term, and the laws are complementary, because even where the behavior changes, there will still be what we hope will eventually just be outliers, and we need a legislative framework to address that. We need policies that promote fair treatment, that speak to the penalties that will be enacted where gender-based violence is perpetuated. So it is a very complementary endeavor. Back over to you, Ms. Brackett.
Thank you very much. Mr. Johansen, would you like to add anything, or are you okay?
No, I basically just support what Alison said, which is that in the long term, if you really want change, you need to change mindsets and culture. But that said, and I'm not referring to this the question in the chat, laws and regulations also matter. They do have an impact. Although, of course, you don't get rid of people driving too fast or driving drunk by making it illegal to go to traffic, as an example. But at least you have a measure where you can enforce, where you can provide accountability with the legal framework, basically prohibiting this, and therefore also policies and legislation matters in this matter, and particularly in the short term, while that culture change that so many have talked of this morning takes place, because that is a longer term perspective, and as Mr. Chen said, it is the only way to make it happen is to take that first step.
Thank you very much for that. And I'll just also add, because we have this approach with both CCL and CEC, it means that there is the trickle-down effect of having policies implemented through EOs across the region, who indirectly will employ thousands of persons, and that protection will extend, hopefully, into the workplace. Similarly, we have the Caribbean Congress of Labor, who from the labor perspective will reinforce training and implementation in their labor reps. So the intention is to as Ms. Drayton said, have a complementary system where the legislative framework forms the base, but the trickle-down effect is treated too through the partners that we have on this initiative, being CEC and the CCL. We do have one other question coming through, and that is from Ms. Mills, the St. Kitts Nevis Labour spokesman newspaper. Ms. Mills, if you don't mind, I'm not seeing your full question. Would you mind listing the question in the chat just before we wrap up? Okay, I'm not seeing that forthcoming, but if before our vote of thanks closes and that question is submitted, we'll have it addressed. I'll now turn over to Ms. Susan Hodge, Assistant General Secretary. Actually, before I do that, we have a question coming through from TV6 News in Trinidad and Tobago from Cindy. Could Mr. Lewis explain his opening remarks on the various stumbling blocks encountered when dealing with various police departments and the judiciary? And I think that was alluded to in the context of implementation, but Mr. Lewis, if you just wanted to provide a brief response to that specifically.
Thank you very much. And I was quoting from a study in Trinidad and Tobago in particular, but I will dare say that even without knowledge of that study, throughout the region, most of our countries, we are aware that there has been consistent complaints from many of our women folks, in particular, a number of other issues, but because we are dealing with gender-based violence, that many times it is difficult to get investigations carried out. Many times response to complaints are slow in being addressed. And that is also related to the judicial system, where matters remain pending in courts forever and forever and ever. People become frustrated. And also, based on the nature of the violence, sometimes, because most of the courts are public, some of our women folks and girls and children find it difficult, very taxing, very intimidating to go to these court hearings, because then it becomes public knowledge and there are all kinds of stigmas. So what that has shown is that as we address those matters, resources need to be placed at these disposals to be able to make the environment conducive so that these matters can be addressed in a more speedily manner and more confidential manner, and a manner that is, as I said, conducive to the comfort of the people bringing the cases. Yes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lewis. And thank you, Ms. Drayton, for submitting your response in the chat as well. I will now hand over to Ms. Susan Hodge, Assistant General Secretary of the Caribbean Congress of Labour, to facilitate the vote of thanks.
Good morning, all. Cicero once said, and I quote, "Gratitude is not only the greatest of virtues, but the parent of all others." It is my task this morning to deliver the vote of thanks for this virtual launch. The Spotlight Initiative is shining the spotlight on the national, regional, women's movement organizations, men and boys, on gender-based violence and how it translates and the impact it has on the workplace. Thank you. Two little words that mean so much. Let me start with the panelists and our feature address presenter. Thank you all for your insightful and thought-provoking remarks. Brother Andre Lewis, President of the CCL, for highlighting the need of the employer and men being an integral part of reducing gender-based violence in the workplace, a true challenge for us all. Thank you to the President of the Caribbean Employers Confederation, Mr. Chen, for that call to action, asking us to unlearn the historical, cultural norms that still remain. Thank you to Mr. Lars Johansen, Deputy Director, ILO Decent Work Team and Office for the Caribbean, for reminding us that the COVID-19 pandemic blurred the lines between work and home and took away the safe haven work provided for some persons experiencing gender-based violence. Ms. Alison Drayton, Director, Representative of the UNFPA Caribbean Sub-Regional Office. Thank you for your presentation, which highlighted the reason for this initiative and how it will be implemented in the Caribbean, and how some work environments as they exist now are not conducive to anyone producing their best work. To Cipriani College of Labor Studies, the ILO and the UNFPA for the invaluable funding and work you are and have put into this initiative. I know that where we are now, we will not be this time next year. To our audience, without you, to our audience and the media, without you in our virtual space, we would have just been talking to ourselves. And of course, to those persons who never get the recognition they deserve, the IT team, the Zoom masters. Thank you, gracias, merci, masha danki, grazie, danke schön, spasibo, arigato, dhanyavad, whatever your language. Thank you.
Thank you very much to you, Ms. Hodge, for that vote of thanks, and thanks again to all those who would have attended this morning. Please note that the recording from this morning's press conference will be posted later this afternoon to the Cipriani's YouTube page. For those who were on the media invite, you should also receive a direct copy of that recording for your replay. If there are any unanswered questions, we'll be sure to send direct responses to those questions. And if you have any follow-up questions for the team, feel free to submit those questions via the email address that would have submitted or invited you to this press conference. On behalf of all partners this morning, my name is Brittany Brathwaite, and thank you for attending this launch. We look forward to phenomenal changes coming out of this Spotlight initiative. Have a wonderful day.